My name is Dabarut Tabash. I'm a professor at C-PREE and HMEI here at Princeton, and I'm really very delighted today to be able to introduce Dr. Weila Gong, who's going to speak to us about the work implementing a low-carbon future, climate leadership in Chinese cities, which has also come out in book form from OUP, and I'm very happy to have a copy that Weila very kindly sent to me. So I strongly urge you to also track down the book after this talk. So to introduce Weila, she actually has a background in both political science and law, and is currently at the University of California, San Diego. So she is at precisely at the Environmental Policy and at Center for Environmental Policy and Behavior at the Environmental Science and Policy Department at UC Davis. She's also had recent postdocs at Kennedy School and at Georgetown, and currently also has an affiliation at the climate program of the Berkeley Economy and Society Initiative at UC Berkeley. So Weila has a lot of sort of experience across different really prestigious US academic institutions. But I think the key point for us is that she has deep experience working in and around climate policy in China, particularly at the subnational level. And for those of us, and I see many colleagues in the room who are interested in subnational climate policy, I think Weila's work is sort of a landmark piece of detailed analysis of how this works in the country that's probably the most important country experimenting with climate policy these days, which of course is China. So we all have a lot to learn from China, and we have a lot to learn from Weila. So welcome, and thank you for joining us here.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for Professor Dubash's introduction. It's my great pleasure to be here at Princeton to discuss my first book titled Implementing a Low-Carbon Future, Climate Leadership in Chinese Cities. So this book is based on an original study that I conducted in 4 Chinese cities, drawing on over 100 interviews and detailed process tracing of the implementation process of the 4 cities, nearly a period of 10 years. So this book attempts to answer the question, why are some cities more successful than others in initiating and implementing low-carbon policy actions within China's centralized political system? Why should we care about climate policy implementation? Why China matters? So there is an ongoing debate about how can we evaluate the success of climate policy. Particularly, how can we avoid climate ambition trap where governments pledge bold climate targets without actually delivering action on the ground. As U.S. federal level retreats from climate action, there is also an increased interest in understanding whether China is willing to or capable of filling in the void in global climate leadership. Even back to the time of Kyoto Protocol, the U.S. government questioned whether China as a country is willing to take the responsibility of addressing climate change. Then, the more of a recent discussion about whether China's NDC is ambitious enough or it can be more of a promote further global climate efforts during the geopolitics is also raised a lot of questions about China's approach to dealing with climate change. So we need to move our understanding about China's approach to dealing with climate change beyond the journalistic narratives. And this book really fills in the gap by emphasizing and also unpack what is China actually doing on climate change. So this figure shows you the annual carbon CO2 emissions by world region from 1750 to 2024. So we can see that from a fairly long time, the emission level didn't change much until 1950s. And since then, there is a huge increase of carbon emissions in the atmosphere. First, more initially driven by developed economies such as US, EU countries, and more recently driven by the more developing economies such as China and other Asian countries. And we know that globally, there are over 114 countries have already pledged carbon neutrality goals. However, no national pledge can be achieved without subnational engagement. Indeed, across globe, over 3,000 cities and regions have pledged climate targets, but we know very little about how those targets can be actually translated into action on the ground. Indeed, recent research shows that only less than 10% of those cities are on track of achieving some of their climate targets. So how can we understand the variation in local climate policy implementation? Despite being the world's largest carbon emitter as well as the world's largest developing economy, China has also pledged to achieve carbon neutrality around the mid-century with a specific target setting, such as meeting carbon peak before 2030 and a continued 7 to 10% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from peak levels before 2035, and also achieving carbon neutrality before 2060. So the extent to which China can achieve its low carbon energy transition will have a huge impact on the global efforts in addressing climate change. And China's domestic success in achieving its climate goals is also in large dependent on local implementation. And particularly those implementations in Chinese cities. Why? Chinese cities accounted for more than 85% of China's carbon emissions. So those big metropolitan areas, which are marked in red on this map, are the major producers of greenhouse gas emissions. So the success of China's low carbon energy transition is also in large depend whether those cities can become truly low carbon. So climate change in developing countries, particularly in China, is not just about another type of environmental protection. It's about development. It's about low carbon development. What is low carbon development? So the Chinese government started to explore low carbon development with the goal to decouple its economic growth from increased use of fossil fuels. So we know that China is a centralized political system, but this country also has an element of multi-level governance. So China has the tradition that the national government gives larger leeway to local areas and regions to test the feasible policy solutions for policy change before scaling up nationwide. So the National Low Carbon City Pilot Program is an important policy program that marks the beginning of subnational climate engagement in China's climate governance. So this is also the major program I examined in this book. So from 2010 to 2018, there were 81 cities joined the National Pilot Program. So from the map on the left, you can see that almost every province has one or two low carbon city pilot. So for becoming a low carbon city pilot, all those cities need to pledge specific target setting across building, transportation, and also energy sectors in terms of carbon emission reductions. Then over almost 8 years, my research finds that only very few of them were able to introduce institutional efforts in terms of introduce standards, regulations, legislation, as well as the creation of agency paired with trained staff to follow through those implementation. So how can we understand? In a centralized political system, there is also local variation in terms of implementing low carbon policy action. So here are two cities in my research. So both of the cities, so Shenzhen and Xiamen, joined the National Pilot Program at the same year in 2010. Then only one of the cities was actually able to deliver the policy pledge as it promised. So Shenzhen used to be a fishing village next to Hong Kong. Then it has become a leader in low carbon development and has fostered a globally competitive EV industry. It also has issued legislation on green finance to require the enterprises to disclose their carbon emission data. Then it also was the first city launched local carbon emission trading system. Then not every city is like Shenzhen, including Xiamen. Xiamen is also a very environmentally friendly city, and it's a tourist city located opposite to Taiwan. So it has also known for its ecological protection. It joined the pilot program the same year as Shenzhen did, with a very ambitious urban renewal program, applying all kinds of low carbon indicators through the design, construction, and the maintenance of this new urban program. But that program was not able to implement it. So we tend to believe that both cities with strong political support joined the pilot program, at the same time without the previous experience, tend to have similar level of policy progress, but only one of them have achieved substantial implementation. The other is more of involved in more of a random, sporadic engagement. How? So what the literature tells us about local responses towards climate action is all about interest groups' influence, central-local relations, how important the political leaders are. Despite the importance of interest groups, particularly I think in the democratic system, such as in the US, in influencing local climate policy making, those cities joining the national pilot program was actually led by those local government, rather than the industrial sector. Interestingly, at the beginning, some of those industrial sectors was very questionable or very skeptical towards the carbon policy mechanism, such as the carbon emission trading system, because they worried that that can be a new form of government rent-seeking behaviors. Then for people interested in Chinese politics, we tend to believe that the evaluation system, which mobilizes more of an incentive local officials to promote initiative aligned with central level government, is the most powerful mechanism. But actually, those cities joined the pilot program when there was no institutional arrangement there for low carbon. So there is no immediate political or economic gains those local officials can have by participating or promoting this new, totally new issue like low carbon on their local policy agenda or policy process. So why they want to do that? Then we know that the political leaders such as mayors and governors, they are very powerful. Then we also know that those political leaders, they change their position from time to time. And the turnover of those political leaders usually actually can impact the more of a sustained policy implementation. But why some cities were able to continue to deliver low carbon policy action despite the change in political leadership? So this research really trying to fill the research gap that why some areas are better than others in making those climate policy action, particularly through the implementation process, more durable. And this research particularly trying to emphasize the role of middle-level bureaucrats. So I call them bureaucratic entrepreneurs in introducing as well as sustaining the policy actions through the whole implementation process. So why some areas are doing better than others in making durable climate policy action? My answer is bridging leadership. So what is bridging leadership? So I define bridging leadership as the process through which bridging leaders mobilize the political support as well as the implementation alliance to translate those climate pledges into sustained action on the ground. Who can be the bridge leaders? I also call them bureaucratic entrepreneurs. So in the more conventional democratic system, and according to authors such as John Kingdon, everyone can be policy entrepreneurs as long as they mobilize resources to move the idea into the more of a policy agenda. However, my research shows that in the China's centralized political system, middle-level bureaucrats, they are the ones who actually mobilize those resources needed to translate policy pledges into actions. In contrast to the political leaders who change their position every 3 or 5 years, those middle-level bureaucrats, they tend to stay in their locality almost their entire careers. That makes them the opportunity to gain insights into the local politics, policy, and the policy-making process. So they are the ones actually making the bridge to mobilize political support and implementation alliance for sustained implementation. We know that for any political system, it's very challenging to introduce any new issue areas in the existing policy system because the political apathy in the bureaucratic system, officials, they're too busy, weren't able to really look at the new issues. Or we are lacking of policy solutions for policy challenges. Or we're counting fierce opposition in the implementation process. My research shows that the bridge leaders in the Chinese political system were able to employ 3 strategies to overcome such challenges. First, winning political support. So those bridge leaders, they're able to persuade the key political leaders, such as mayors, by emphasizing the importance of acting on low-carbon issues and how that can benefit them to climb their career ladders. Then they also able to create a group of trained personnel who are qualified to provide policy solutions to policy challenges. So that is different from what we learn from the more of a policy entrepreneur leadership literature, which mainly emphasize the individual is the key entity to introduce policy solutions to challenges. Then we see there is a team working behind to support them with those providing solutions to those challenges. Then the third strategy is building implementation alliance with key local actors, so such as with local people's congress, so that can actually authorize local government has the authority to require related industrial sector join the implementation process, even though they are very skeptical towards the new mechanism like policy, low carbon policy. So through all the 3 strategies, the bridge leaders were able to mobilize the implementing resources that translate those climate pledges into sustained actions, leading to implementation outcomes. So there is a huge debate. How can we evaluate the climate policy? So particularly in China's centralized political system, the carbon accounting system is still under construction and still in its infancy. So I evaluated the different level of local success in delivering low carbon policy implementation in terms of the level of policy institutionalization. So I choose specific indicators such as legislation, standards, regulations that are being introduced through the implementation process. Of particular importance, I find that it is very important to create group of trained personnel paired with the institutions to enforce those like regulation standards and the legislation through the implementation process. So here I want to quickly show you the research design. So this research is based on a comparative case study in 4 cities. So the 4 cities, they are similar in terms of several variables. So you can think of like the political support that they won when they joined the pilot program, central local relations, bureaucratic incentives. But then over the years, they have developed a totally different approach towards implementing low carbon policy. So apart from the 2 cases, Shenzhen and Xiamen, I briefly mentioned before, there are 2 other cases, Zhenjiang and Nanchang. So Zhenjiang is a city in Jiangsu province. It serves as the major coal-based electricity production center, supplying the electricity for the local areas in the eastern China. Then I find that it actually introduced a series of institutional efforts, but was not actually able to fully implement it. I call it symbolic engagement because the power sector is very strong in at the local level, and that kind of opposition from the power sector made the local engagement in Zhenjiang is more of a symbolic. So a lot of institutional innovation without more of a sustained action lead to continued institutional building. Then the fourth case is Nanchang. Nanchang is an inland city, usually be considered as economic lagging city. Then it also, despite the kind of expectation that the cities, when they are bounded with resources, they are not able to promoting low carbon issues. This city was able to issue one of the first legislation on low carbon development, even with a local budget supporting related business and education program. So I call it some performative engagement because the bridge leader, when it designed the program, the main focus is really trying to promote a visible project to get external investment, so funding. So without very carefully thinking about how to create the trained personnel to follow through the implementation process. So performative in a way to catering to external interest to get money to local, but without not very careful consideration into implementation. So that are the cases. Yeah, we know that China, as more of a centralized political system, we know that its decision-making process is lacking of transparency. So it's only known to a group of insiders who work very closely with the governments. However, I was able to overcome the challenges by conducting field research, including over 100 interviews with policy practitioners inside and outside of the government, including those officials across different levels of government. So I asked them, why you sitting join the pilot program? What are the key challenges? What are the next steps? So when political turnover happens, I asked them, how that affected the local implementation process. Then through the field research, I was also able to assess original government document and project documents, as well as participate in the local official trainings to get to understanding how they get exposed to the climate change idea and what their response in their everyday work. Then I also was able to talk with industrial sectors, such as the wind sectors, to get more of an understanding about the whole process of different stakeholders in the more of implementation and also policymaking process. So through the field research, comparative case studies, I was able to reconstruct the implementation processes of those 4 cities over a period of nearly 1 decade of their implementation. So this is a typology of different types of local engagement. So depending on the ability of those bridge leaders in mobilizing political support and implementation alliance, I identified the 4 types of local engagement in the implementation. From substantive engagement, meaning those so the localities were able to deliver the policy goals as they promised and into the sustained implementation, to performative engagement, to symbolic engagement, to sporadic engagement, meaning they only promote random initiative without institutional efforts to carry those implementations through political leadership changes. Due to the time limit, I will focus on 2 of the 4 cases. So the Shenzhen is the advanced case, so I call the substantive implementation case in my research. So Shenzhen is the city joined the pilot program. So at the beginning, then over the years, it was able to introduce a level of policy institutionalization consisting of standards, regulation, legislation paired with creation of trained personnel to enforce those initiatives and policies. So Shenzhen was also the first city to launch the local emission trading system. So carbon emission trading systems, which actually is a field, the U.S. was some of the first ones introduced like carbon emission trading system. Then China now has the world's largest carbon trading market. Actually was based on local experimentation, including Shenzhen's experience. So how Shenzhen was able to launch the first local carbon emission trading system. So it all comes down to the important role of Vice Mayor Tang. So I call him as a bridge leader. So Vice Mayor in the Chinese political system is not a political leader because Vice mayors tend to stay their localities almost their entire careers without promoting to the higher level of government. So after the vice mayor heard about the opportunity of joining the carbon emission trading pilot program that introduced by the national government, the National Development and Reform Commission, he convinced the mayor the importance to get Shenzhen on the list. Then the mayor and the vice mayor, they went to Beijing and to the National Development and Reform Commission to convince the official in charge of the program that they need to consider Shenzhen as a pilot. After that, the bridge leader, Vice Mayor Tang, also create a group of trained personnel to provide the solutions for designing a Shenzhen ETS. So they went to EU to learn like EU ETS design. Then they came up with their own like Shenzhen ETS design. Of particular importance is that the Vice Mayor Tang was able to build coalition with local People's Congress to pass a legislation on Shenzhen emission trading system, which authorized Shenzhen municipal government the authority to require over 700 industrial entities to join the carbon emission trading system compulsorily. And since then, the Shenzhen ETS has become one of the low carbon institutions keep working as a major mechanism in Shenzhen for achieving the goal of decarbonization. So here I want to show you the timeline. How the bridge leader mobilized the support, both the political support as also the support from the national level government to consider Shenzhen as a pilot, then create a group of trained personnel to provide a solution to the policy challenges. Then very strategically working with local People's Congress to pass the legislation, make those high emitters to join the pilot program compulsorily. So even after the bridge leader as well as the mayor no longer in their offices, the Shenzhen emission trading system keep operating as a low carbon institution serving the decarbonization purpose in Shenzhen. So here I want to show you some of the quotes from my interviews, help you to get understanding about the role of bridge leader in the implementation process. So I talked with a local official, worked very closely with Vice Mayor Tang when they're introducing Shenzhen carbon emission trading system. So he mentioned that Vice Mayor Tang conveyed the urgency of the ETS pilot to Shenzhen Municipal People's Congress. He mobilized his contacts and networks from his time as the vice director of the committee of the People's Congress. So here, what we can learn that we tend to believe that local officials, or once they won't be able to promote it to higher level, they may not willing to do much beyond their like job description. Then we also tend to have a more focus on the mayors, then how they kind of as a key figures to mobilize the local participation. So here you see that actually in the operational level, the local official, like the vice mayor as the bridge leader, as a local official, they have to play a very important role in mobilize those coalitions in local areas and regions. So then I also talked to the same person after a few years later when the bridge leader left the office. So I want to know how the Shenzhen ETS functioned. So he mentioned that our work has not changed much since Vice Mayor Tang left the office. At Shenzhen ETS, we have 40 to 50 employees. And we are regularly in contact with the Shenzhen Development and Reform Commission as we operate the system. So that means that even though we tend to have the expectation that the turnover of political leaders, so the mayor actually also changed his office just a few months when after the vice mayor changed, retired. So the Shenzhen ETS didn't get much affected due to the change of those leaders. So it's kind of contrast to our expectation. Once the leader change their office, though the local actions won't get huge impact and face disruption. So we see that as once the institution was introduced, particularly paired with the creation of trained personnel, it can self-sustaining through the change of political leadership. So the Shenzhen case shows you how a city was able to mobilize political support as well as implementation alliance to promote sustained local action, low carbon actions through the change of political leadership. Another case is Xiamen. So Xiamen is the lagging case. In this research, I call it sporadic implementation because it was not able to introduce institutional measures to continually promote the implementation. So Xiamen joined the national pilot program the same year as Shenzhen did with this, we briefly mentioned the urban renewal program with very advanced low carbon indicators for the design, construction, and the maintenance of this new urban development project. But it was not able to implement it. How? It all comes down to the loss of deputy director Lin, so the bridge leader. So the bridge leader, so he was the deputy director of the construction bureau. So the bureau was in charge of the building and also rural urban development. So it's basically responsible for the building sector. So building sector is one of the three major sectors when it comes to low carbon development in China. So the other two is energy and transportation. So this is an agency more responsible for implementation rather than cross-divisional coordination. Then the bridge leader was actually able to convince the mayor the importance of putting Xiamen as one of the first round of local city pilot. Then was able to provide the materials that made Xiamen was selected as one of the several first round low carbon city pilot. But the administrative authority over implementing low carbon city pilot program was shifted from the bridge leaders bureau to another even more powerful bureau called the Development and Reform Commission in Xiamen. However, in that new powerful bureau, there was no local official really interested in low carbon issue. So for a long time, the low carbon issue was basically shelved in Xiamen. So here you can see the timeline of Xiamen's low carbon policy implementation process. So this is time when the Deputy Director Lin was able to mobilize the political support as well as convince the group to provide the MOFE low carbon policy action plan to make Xiamen as one of the pilots. Then the administrative authority shifts from its administrative agency to the new agency with no one really interested in that. So once a new mayor came to the office, then with a totally different, beautiful Xiamen strategy, it's more of a focus on development and urban infrastructure development. So the low carbon issue was basically very isolated, not on the major priority of those Xiamen's policy agenda. So Xiamen was only able to initiate more of a random low carbon actions during this period of time. So I also want to share with you some of the quotes from my interviews to see Xiamen's response towards its more of how Xiamen developed its action on the ground and how it's changed over time. So I talked with a central government official who is in charge of the low carbon city pilot program. So she mentioned that Xiamen was very active at the beginning, but I don't know who is in charge of the low carbon pilot program as they change the contact person too often. So here we see that as she commented on Xiamen's response towards the low carbon policy implementation. So she didn't mention the mayor. She actually mentioned the contact person is a major indicator that there are some substantial progress on the ground. Then I also talked to a professor. He won a grant from Xiamen government focusing on low carbon development. Then after a couple of years, I revisited him. He mentioned that low carbon is the thing of the past already. Now Xiamen is all for the beautiful Xiamen strategy. So that means if the institutional measures haven't been effectively introduced in the policy-making process, the political leadership's change can actually affect the implementation process a lot. Then finally, I also wanted to share with you a quote from the person who is very close to the Xiamen Low Carbon City Pilot Program implementation process. So he mentioned that the challenge with Xiamen is the low carbon issue is that there is no another agent we can work with, unlike Shenzhen, to improve implementation. So that shows that even we assume that China's central political system, the top-down approach is the type of implementation mechanism we think that's most important. As long as President Xi Jinping says anything is important, then local officials just wanting to compete for delivered action. But actually we see that there is a limitation of local governments immobilize coalition that is very important for produce sustained low carbon policy action through the implementation process. So here we see that. So as another also environmentally friendly city is can be a very good candidate for a low carbon development champion. Actually, was not able to deliver its climate promise into action, particularly due to the lacking of a bridging leader in translate those climate pledges into everyday work on the ground. So to wrap up, so I want to summarize the key contribution of this book. So this book is trying to fill the research gap to answer the question, so why some cities are more capable than others in producing durable climate action. So in contrast, the conventional wisdom focusing on the role of top leaders, as well as more of a top-down approach, my research really emphasized the importance of bureaucratic entrepreneurs. I call them bridge leaders. Their important role in mobilizing the implementing resources required to produce a sustained implementation action. There are three strategies they are using to mobilize the resources. First, winning the political support to overcome the political empathy in the bureaucratic system, particularly to cooperate with officials from different bureaucratic agencies inside the government to support these new issue areas onto agenda. Then second, gathering trained personnel to provide policy solutions for the policy challenges. Third, build implementation alliance, so work with powerful local actors to overcome the potential challenges in the implementation. And of particular importance, I want to emphasize when we think about the low carbon policy action, how to measure its success. I think it's very important to look at the level of policy institutionalization, such as the standards, regulation, and the legislation being introduced into the implementation process. And very important is once those institutions be introduced, we need the creation of the trained personnel to really follow through the implementation of those standard regulation and legislation. So to make more of a long-term change. Then if we think about moving beyond, so based on this research, what we can learn from China and how can we think looking forward the more of a continued climate actions in more of a complicated geopolitics, with more of a rising geopolitical tensions currently. I think my research shows that even in a more of a centralized political system, there is a creativity with those local officials. They know how to mobilize the political support and also the implementation alliance. So those resources to incrementally introduce those institutional efforts that can lead to long-term change. So that kind of change can actually also overcome the challenges created by the changes in the political leadership. Then if we think about more of a democratic system, so we are the source of bridge leadership, and who can be the implementing bridge leaders. So I think that are some of the open questions and welcome discussion, yeah, in our seminar. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Weila. I really enjoyed sort of in particular, the dives into the couple of cases, and it just left me kind of a question about the other cases as well, but maybe we can come back to that as a discussion. So the floor is now open for questions. Okay, let me start. I saw Ned at the back first, and then after Rose.
Well, I'm Ned. I'm a fifth-year PhD in SPIA. Really great presentation. So excited to see the book out. I wanted to hear more about sort of central-local relations and hear more about how multi-level networks play into what bridge entrepreneurs are able to, or bridge leaders are able to do as bureaucratic entrepreneurs. To what extent, it seemed like a lot of the implementation resources you described in the cases were resources that were mobilized at the local level. So the vice mayor and the deputy director found allies locally. Is there a role that, where the a bureau to be a bridge leader finds allies, at the provincial level in that bureau and then brings it, is there any where their embeddedness in a multi-level network helps, or did you see the sort of implementation and the role they played mostly as bringing things together locally through their local networks in order to, connect?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so respond?
I think I was just getting some water, so why don't you answer this question first?
Okay, yeah, I think that's a great question. So you're asking about how the multi-level governance systems can actually either provide more resources for the local governments or the officials when it's think about how to mobilize those required resources. I think there are two. I think two key points. Actually, in my research, I find that those some of those local action, like low carbon action, was able to scale up to the higher level of government at the provincial level, as in the case of Zhenjiang. So this city actually introduced one of the first low carbon city evaluation index. So trying to solve the problem, how can we measure the success in a more quantitative way, as we have so many pilots. So it was the first city to promote the index, like the evaluation system, and was able to work with the provincial officials to make it as a provincial standard. So, and also the national level government, the think tank work for the low carbon and also international climate negotiation, and also coordinating local implementation, also reference the evaluation system publicly several times. So we see that those policy entrepreneurs and the bureaucratic entrepreneurs, they were able to navigate systems, try to scale up those local standards, introduce the implementation process to higher level of government, also get attention. But also the challenge is the standard hasn't seen being widely used as a real mechanism to evaluate the 81 cities' performance as outcome. So I think there's still some gaps, right? So when you think about regulations has been successfully scaled up, but we see the lacking maybe of was the trained personnel to really enforce or follow through the implementation process. So that means it makes more of it still lacking of progress on the ground. And the second thing for the multi-level governance is those pilots, they're selected by the national government, but based on the willingness of those local cities. Then during my field research, I see that all the cities involved in international engagement at different points, but mainly those international support is helping them to frame the issue and provide some of those policy solutions, international cooperation, like choosing different technology when they design the low carbon city. But then they usually stops at the implementation stage. Then those kind of expertise was replaced by local expertise, like those local researchers, as well as local research institutes institute and also their related stakeholders on the really implementation stage. So we see like different level of international engagement in the implementation, the whole process. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I had a question in my head, but I'm gonna wait. No, go ahead. Please.
I enjoyed the talk. Thank you so much. I had two questions, but maybe I'll just focus on one. Do each of the cities pick a particular thing? So Shenzhen picked the DS, the other one picked building, and you also showed TV somewhere. Do they pick particular features? And my real question was Shenzhen so successful because businesses got some financial gain? So that there was a buy because it actually built the gain. But if your intervention is urban planning or, something more systemic, but they may not actually get financial gain of it. Could it be an alternate hypothesis that that's why this functions? Because they both seem to have had reasonably good rich people who left. So the idea was, is it the profit motive or apparent from, there must have been, BTS must be viable financially. Was that the real thing? Because it wasn't the same thing in the reference.
Can I just add on to that? Because my question was very closely related. So I had the same question about the nature of the actual project, ETS versus the urban planning kind of project. But the aspect of the ETS I was wondering about the most was the fact that it also had a lot of sponsorship and interest from the central government, right? Because there were ETS pilots being carried out in many, many places, and the central government was interested in doing that. So did that support from the central government also played a role in the success of Shenzhen as an additional hypothesis in addition to others?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, interesting thoughts, and also I think important thoughts to think about more. Also, I think connected to the previous question, right? So I think maybe we'll start. So for the different types of initiative, maybe I can start there. So I think that if you look at their proposal, like the low carbon implementation action plan, is quite standard. So they have a bit different target setting for different sectors, but they always have the same component, for the industrial sector, transportation sector, as well as building sector. So because each bureaucratic agency, they submit the initiative by themselves. So then the Development and Reform Commission, they just synthesize all the initiatives and put it into a implementation action plan. But in the more of the implementation process, so based on the implementation action plan, they will choose more of the actions that can align with their strengths. Like Shenzhen ETS, they choose the building sector as one of the major sectors in addition to the industrial entities, because they have very strong green building research as well as the more of a standard building capacity. So, and also the bridge leader work very closely with the leader in the green building sector. So they choose prioritize the building sector as one of their niche when they launch the carbon emission trading system. Then other cities the performative case I just mentioned is an inland city, so very lagging behind. It's very challenging to impress the higher level of government to see their its progress. So the bridge leader told me that, so we hardly can use any other alternative. So we just want to promote some visible action. So legislation is actually very challenging. That involves months of negotiations between different agencies to see whether we need a legislation, right? You can just use a regulation, right? But the bridge leader really wanting to kind of promote the visible initiative and also get some actual funding by one-on-one negotiation from the central level of government. So that is the more of a strategy. So those local leaders think about how can we be more of a, I think the pilot program is also based on the regional competitiveness, because no pilot wanted to repeat another's work, so they wanted to become the leader. So I think that is more of the dynamic behind. So as you mentioned, whether that ETS is also more successful because of the national level support. Definitely national level support is important in a way, because I read that their documents, it looks like the Shenzhen, it also positioned itself as the hub, to connecting with various international actors to showcase China's success. So it's not just a local, like a regional scale influence, it's more of a, as the showcase for the China success for promoting that. So the national government can definitely introduce more of the resources, and also when it build more of the international connections, it more of a get more of a easier approval. Because for any local government, you wanted to work with international actor, you need to make the documentation. There's a whole process. I think the more of it being a pilot as well as like Shenzhen in several pilots. So emission trading system is one pilot, and the low carbon city pilot is another pilot. So just like speed up, like it's more of a communication with its local practice, and also reach out for more for resources. So for the ETS, it gets some of its support from like German development corporation. So it actually connected to EU. It also connected to like Japan and another like US to learn the experience. So, but I think if you compare it to another pilot like Shanghai and also Beijing, it's still a leader. So I think the kind of question is why, like Shenzhen, right? How it become the more of the first ones can more of also pass the legislation. I think that are some of the political questions behind. Thank you.
If we take 2 or 3 questions, yes, please, there and then front here.
Yes. Yeah, hi Weila, I'm Melody. I'm a second year PhD student at Princeton. It's really interesting. Thank you for sharing. I'm wondering if this study also looks at emissions leakage, given that, for example, Shenzhen, they are manufacturing.
Sorry, you might have to speak up a little now.
Yeah. I'm wondering if this study also looked at emissions leakage, like in between the cities. Like, what is the boundary of emissions, given that a lot of the parts of the EVs or battery are being manufactured in other cities, so inherently it might be like Shenzhen might be on an easier path to decarbonize, given its status as a technological hub, that they're only focusing on the end of the like tech sector. So yeah, I wonder how does that play into the city's dynamics?
Just take the second question, right?
Actually, it's similar like this is about the difference of these 2 cities, right? Shenzhen is more technology intensive and also EV company. But in comparison, Xiamen is more like a tourist city. So maybe I'm not sure whether low carbon policy is in line with both cities' development. So like economic development, very low carbon policy could increase Shenzhen EV manufacturers or company increase, but will not help with Xiamen tourism or the local industry. So yeah, the point to consider. And it's also my question.
Yeah, please go ahead. Did you want to add to that?
That was also my second question: how are these emissions reported, and how is the ETS? So if there's a company that's in charge of building these, are they reporting the emissions of the buildings they're building, or are they reporting their own company's emissions? So I'm just curious how carbon is being counted, one citywide with the scopes, and also the scope 1, 2, and 3, and also within ETS. How does a company that's building buildings, are they taking responsibility for stock, or is it just their company? The company's corporate out.
Yeah, okay, I can. So first, answer the question. So this research actually is covering like 2010 to 2018. So at that stage, Shenzhen was not actually started with the whole lifestyle accounting. So, but now I know they also Shenzhen was also the first city issued the financial, so green finance. So that actually required those companies to have a disclosure of their business. I think it's more of a 3 scope, so of those like carbon emissions. So I think that is a important. I think also the current focus, you can try to follow up what is happening there. But back to that stage, there was no such initiative. Yeah. Then for the Shenzhen and Xiamen, yeah, I think it makes sense to me, because I think, as I just mentioned, so climate issue in developing countries such as China is not just about the environmental protection, right? So I think the very strong industrial incentives is very important. But at the beginning, for the carbon emission, but for the Shenzhen's action, the EV sector wasn't. I think it's more of a featured as some of the key initiative. Actually, it's more of the ETS, and also there is a like low carbon city development. So that is more of a stand alone as an industrial policy. So as we see in China, it's the same. When China ever to claim we are like doing a lot on climate change, actually it's emphasized on the industrial policy. I think you also get a sense, you're right. So Xiamen, it seems, hasn't able to really think about more of a industrial policy and with much more of an alliance with its more of a climate low carbon strategy. Yeah. Then for the building accounting system, because building system, I think in Shenzhen has the most, I think the robust, they have the data. So for the public building, they have all the like data, like the emissions. So that provided the more of a basis for the building sector join the emission trading system. Then, but there is not too much like discussion about the profits. Yeah, so I didn't see, but it's more of I feel like the carbon emission trading system in China is more seen as a government lead policy mechanism rather than I think the whole like market mechanism just run by its own. So I think that, and also I think for the building sector, I heard a lot is about the challenges about in the ownership. Maybe I think in India it has similar things, right? It's hard to like distinguish like the multiple ownership and also transfer it from different owners. So I think there are some also technical challenges when it comes to like further improve is I think implementation of the market mechanism apart. Yeah.
Thank you. I actually am going to jump into the question because I'm finding it hard to restrain myself on this one. I am really curious actually to do, if we can get just a brief example of one of your two middle cases. Because in a sense, I'm guessing many more cities and there's much more to learn from other parts of the world by your two middle cases where either political ownership or implementation is not quite, is quite low. And so what do those intimate cases look like? Maybe give an example of one of them, and I don't really understand what the difference is between performative and symbolic.
Right. I think that's a great question. So I can quickly go to the typology, maybe. Yeah, I think these two types of engagement, I think that is also the ones I feel really, I learned a lot as I like trying to develop more systematic thoughts about different types of engagement. I think that the performative engagement is really, I mentioned briefly about the motivation of those local leaders because I talked with them, then I asked that is the case of the economic lagging city. So, but it was able to introduce some of the first legislation on low carbon, particularly with the budget. So a lot of cities, even they're pretty rich, like Xiamen, it didn't provide a budget for low carbon.
What is the actual project, or what form did it take in Nanja?
What form?
As in, like, ETS versus urban planning. What was it?
It's mainly the legislation. It's kind of like saying, we need to work on these issues, particularly what provided funding. I think the funding is the most challenging part when the bridge leader trying to create the resources for the climate issue. Then the performative is basically means, I think that is also according to my conversation with him, he feels that it's almost impossible to implement it on the ground like thrustly because the lacking of the more of a, fundamentally the industrial sector's participation, but it was able to really get the support from like actually national level government to support them with more funding sources to keep experimenting that. So I think that is the more of a very, I think, you can see the difference between like more of a, the random, more of a symbolic engagement is also with implementation challenges, but the major goal is not just for funding. It's more of a, we want to make like a local transformation, but the overcome of local oppositions is quite hard because it also already not just for the legislation part, it also create like trained personnel in the implementation process to follow through the like regulation standards. So I think like the more of a, I think it's, even though it's quite similar, there is a little bit difference when we see which case is more just for show, which case is more of a, okay, tried a lot, but still like the substantial progress is not straightforward, but I think they can change over time. So they can change from like substantive to performative, and then symbolic, over time. So, yeah.
Great, thank you so much. I think we're out of time for the seminar, but please join me in thanking Dr. Weila.